morning and welcome to Rising. We have another great show for you today, and let's get right to it. For the first time, the Biden administration held back arms shipments to Israel to try to gain leverage over the country. The White House said last night it held back 3,500 bombs to prevent the U.S.-made weapons being used on the city of Rafah in Gaza. The administration's warning to Israel not to invade has so far fallen on deaf ears. Benjamin Netanyahu ordered tanks into Rafah earlier this week, a city where more than 1 million civilians are holed up seeking refuge from the war.
Now, this is being framed as a significant shift for the Biden administration, which has come under increasing pressure from its own party and from young voices around the nation that have been protesting against the war. However, critics say that the move is performative and does not reflect a meaningful break from America's consistent support of Israel, both diplomatically and materially. Campuses have become a flashpoint both at home and abroad. Today, before the Israeli Knesset, the president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs warned the Israeli government committee that, quote, U.S. campus riots are a direct threat to Israel, going on to say that we cannot accept statements like Israel is an apartheid state or Israel is an occupying state. Here at home, many say students and their votes could help determine the 2024 election. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser was summoned to Capitol Hill to testify about why D.C. police did not heed the call of GWU University to tear down the encampment. She wanted a week to say yes. Hours before the mayor's testimony, protesters and police clashed. Law enforcement began to clear the encampments at GW's University yard. 33 protesters were arrested after demonstrators marched to GW President Ellen Granberg's home. GW parents will hold a press conference today to condemn Granberg for, quote, defaming, ignoring, and endangering students. Parents wrote in a letter to the university's Board of Trustees, "We, the parents of current students at George Washington University, stand in full solidarity with our children and the other students who have risked their education, careers, and safety in order to peacefully exercise their First Amendment rights, oppose the Israeli government's genocide in Gaza, and call on their university to divest from human rights abuses against the Palestinian people." They have demanded the resignations of Granberg and Provost Christopher Allen Bracey. They say Bracey allegedly physically assaulted a student. Evergreen State College in Washington State has become the first United States university to agree to work toward a divestment from Israel. The college was attended by Rachel Corrie, the American peace activist who was killed by Israeli troops in Gaza 21 years ago when defending a family in Rafah. 2024 independent presidential candidate Cornel West wrote on X yesterday, "Rachel's spirit lives on in this bold act of solidarity. Her sacrifice, far from forgotten, continues to inspire actions that cherish and defend precious lives affected in Gaza. This decision honors her memory and the fight for justice and peace." University officials say they have reached an agreement with student protesters and that they will work toward divesting from companies that profit from gross human rights violations and or the occupation of Palestinian territories. All right, it does seem, Robby, increasingly that at least some universities are understanding that you can avoid all of the conflict, all of the violence, all of the arrest, all of the disruption on campus, including the choice that some universities have made, not at the call of the activists, but the choice made by university administrators to cancel graduation ceremonies in their entirety if they simply listen to the students and do what a majority of students and faculty at these institutions keep voting to do, which is to divest from Israel.
Sure. And there is no reason, I think, to cancel the commencements as Columbia did. It's unfair to the students, frankly, to go through this yet again, having had their previous graduations disrupted by COVID. I guess I have a little skepticism of where, like, even where young people are in this. So I wondered what you make of this new polling that Axios was reporting on yesterday from Generation Labs, which is specifically surveying young people. And the conflict in the Middle East was the least important thing on a list of like 10 issues: healthcare reform, educational funding and access, economic fairness and opportunity, racial justice, climate change, gun control, immigration, national security. Conflict in the Middle East dead last. Most of a large majority, 81% of the people in the poll, these are young people, students, say support holding protesters accountable, agreeing with the notion that those who destroyed property or vandalized or illegally occupied buildings should be held responsible by the university. 67% saying occupying campus buildings is unacceptable, and 58% saying it's not acceptable to refuse the university's order to disperse.
What do you want to know about that?
Well, I think there's not, I don't think there's a lot of sympathy for the protesters, even among young people. And so then why should the universities feel pressured to give in if no one is on their side?
Because when they hold the votes at the university, a majority of faculty and students at many of these institutions that have been managed to hold these votes want them to divest. This is not a public opinion poll. This is people who participate and are part of these universities saying they don't want their tuition money to go to funding a genocide in Israel.
Right, but that's just not how most students or most young people feel about this.
Right,
It might be the faculty of the college. But
when I decide how to, say, run my house, I don't take a poll of some stranger on the street. I get to run my house, and the people who attend Columbia University and so many other universities across the country and the people who teach there have made a different kind of decision, and they don't want their money that they pay into the institution to go to funding a genocide in Gaza. Moreover, polls that show what your political priorities are not the same thing as deciding what you are motivated to vote on the basis of. So, for instance, if you ask me right now today what my political priorities are, I would also say healthcare, being able to afford education, housing rights, those kinds of things. But if you were to walk into this room and put a gun to my head, my priorities suddenly change. I wouldn't describe my personal safety in that scenario as something that would ever enter my mind as a tier one priority. But when you are confronted with imagery like what we see out of Gaza, we understand that there's an existential crisis, and we see that our own government and Joe Biden has been participating in actively funding and shielding Israel from diplomatic consequences for its actions overseas, then that might be a but-for cause. I have all of these personal policy priorities, but I am unwilling to vote for someone who would choose to facilitate behaviors, actions that are so morally abhorrent to me. And so I think that polls like that don't capture the reality of what we're saying. I mean, let me ask you this. How can you deny the efficacy and the power of these protests when you have the Israeli Knesset debating whether or not they can tolerate, whether they can allow statements like Israel is an occupying state or Israel is an apartheid state being said on American college campuses? And what do you make of the idea that a foreign country is trying to weigh in on the kind of speech that is permissible among college kids in the United States?
Well, I mean, they can be as mad about it as they want. They can't do anything about it, or shouldn't be able to do anything.
Well, they're trying to do something about it.
Well, we should not, and we shouldn't change any policies that that allow everyone to criticize Israel or say whatever they want about Israel, or if frankly even engage in more genuine, actual anti-Semitic views or racist views or anything else. We have the First Amendment here. Israel can't and shouldn't do anything about that. And you should be continued to speak out and express your opinion on college campuses, no matter how divisive or unpopular your speech has.
Yeah, the bright spot of Rachel Corrie's university being one of the first to actually fully, give in to these demands is really meaningful. Rachel Corrie was protesting in Rafah. This is over 20 years ago, really underscoring how long this conflict has been going on and the kind of violence that's been inflicted on innocent people in Rafah and on Americans, an American citizen who went there to try to protest the destruction that was happening there at the time. And it does, I think, also kind of underscore the lack of accountability there has been historically, not just for Israel's killing of Palestinians in Gaza, the disproportionate historical rate of killings that have been happening in the West Strip, the West Bank as well, but also American citizens. And it feels odd that we've almost memory hold the Jose Andres bombings of just, a month ago or so, in which in 3 separate strikes, Israel hit this aid caravan that had been in coordination with the Israeli government. The top of at least one of the cars had the organization clearly marked on the top. And of course, an American citizen was among those killed, a young man with a young child. And so it does, I think, offer some glimmer of hope for people who have been participating in this battle for decades and decades, namely, first and foremost, obviously, the people who live in Gaza. But it does seem like there's a very long way to go when you're seeing so much pushback from liberals. We're talking about Mayor Bowser, who is now being teed up, interestingly, against the parents of students at these institutions who I think are increasingly concerned that there's going to be real violence, Kent State style, that results in, tragically, a death of more students like that we saw back in Kent State in the Vietnam War protests if police continue to act with such disproportionate force.
Stick around, more rising right up. Can I do
Coming
that
up
again?
next. No, we got it, Robby. Stick around. More Rising coming up for you next.